What's up, everybody? Welcome back to our Kratom Addiction and Recovery Daily Devotional series. So we've been in Exodus chapter 32 recently, and we've been going over the steps of repentance and what that looks like in our recovery process. And yesterday we did the actual process of repentance and what it means to turn away and how that looks. And today we're moving on to restitution and reconciliation. So restitution, what's this all about? God's grace is free, but our sin and our mistakes takes its toll on others. Restitution is about giving back what we've stolen from others by our sin and by our mistakes. Genuine repentance is eager to make things right with the people that we've wronged. So I've found this to be very true in recovery. When we're in our addictions, we get caught in our own worlds that our kratom addiction puts us in. And I've said this a bunch of times that I don't know about for you, but for me, kratom had this really weird way of making me extremely selfish. And I was just stuck in this cycle of needing to take the doses of kratom and being on this like perpetual cycle of taking the doses and then not feeling well and then needing to take the doses again. So it really took my focus and it kind of put me in my own little world. And it also made me super hypercritical of others. And I wasn't able to see my faults in any sort of situations, any sort of relationship struggles, conflicts, anything like that. I just was kind of hyper focused on my own perspective, and I wasn't able to see my wrongdoing. So this step in turning away from our kratom addiction is really important because it allows us to make things right with the people that we've wronged. And you know what? Sometimes this can even be on a personal level too, where in our addiction, we've gotten into these ways of thinking, these ways of living that are not what are best for us. And this can be done personally when we are changing ourselves and moving forward past this addiction. And we are, essentially paying restitution to ourselves when we quit and when we change our lives. And so what does this look like? Like it says here that our sin and essentially our kratom addiction takes its toll on others. And restitution is about giving back what we've stolen from others. So this doesn't need to be like actual money or actual material possessions. Sometimes it can be time. Sometimes it can be, where, like I said, I found myself in this place where I was so hypercritical of others and I was not understanding of anybody else's perspectives. And so what this looked like for me was that when I started to get into about probably the year mark of my recovery, and I was getting through like the really hard like physical and mental aspects of the pause. As I went into my second year of recovery, I really made an effort to reach out to the people that there had been conflicts with in my life during my addiction. And sometimes, we may try to reach out and the other person may not be responsive, but still making the effort to take accountability for the things that we've done. And I guess the first part of that too is recognizing the things that we've done. Because if we don't know what we've done wrong, there's no way that we can take accountability for it. But to be able to like truly turn away from kratom and to truly change our lives, this is an important part of the process. What it does too is it makes peace in our lives. I've mentioned this before that in the 12-step program, there's a step, I forget which one it is, but it's when you start getting into the latter parts of the steps where you take a fearless moral inventory, they call it, of yourself and your life, or like you look at everything and then you make amends with people that you have wronged. And I've told you guys, like, the 12-step stuff isn't really for me, but I definitely gained a lot of valuable insight out of the steps that they use. And there's a reason why it works for some people. And this whole like taking an inventory and making amends, what it's all about is it's not only about for the other person, but it's about for yourself. And when we are in sobriety, and we don't have things that we're self-medicating with, whatever the substance is, then things like conflict and things like wronging somebody, that becomes a lot harder to deal with. And so, this whole restitution, like paying people back for, what we've done and how we've wronged them, it's for the other person, but it's also for ourselves. Because when we've, gone through that process of paying somebody back, like I said, it doesn't need to be money. It can just be, through taking an accountability and apologizing, or, if you weren't spending a lot of time with your partner when you were in your kratom addiction, and, you're then making the effort when you're in recovery to spend time with them, it doesn't need to be just a monetary thing. Then what this does is this allows you to be freed from that burden of, what has happened, like the wrongs that you've done to somebody. So this is an important step, and it gives us essentially peace as we move forward in our recovery process. So the next step that we're going to go over is reconciliation. Sin separates. It puts hostility between God and people, and it drives wedges in human relationships. God's forgiveness of sin makes peace and reconciliation possible, first with Him and then with others. Genuine repentance commits to the hard work of rebuilding relationships broken by sin. Reconciliation takes time, especially when trust has been shattered and wounds are deep. So I was just seeing if there's anything else I should read. That's probably the important stuff of it. So yeah, man, this is a hard part, but when we put in the work of reconciliation, it's incredibly rewarding. And so what does that look like when we relate it to kratom addiction? When we were in our addictions and kratom becomes our main focus, it separates us from other people. Most importantly, it separates us from God. And so when we go through this process of turning away from kratom, there is a point where we are reconciled with God and we are reconciled with others. A lot of times there is not a, immediate aspect to this. A lot of times this takes some time to go through this process. How this looked for me was on the level of reconciling with God. I came to a point where I knew that my kratom addiction was destroying me. And when I went to God and I went through these steps that we've talked about in the days before of actually turning away from kratom, there came a point where my relationship with God was restored. And I was, reconciled in relationship with Him. And that's the point of Jesus, and why I love Jesus so much too, is because that's what Jesus symbolizes and means is, the reconciliation between us and God because of Jesus's sacrifice for our mistakes and our sin. And so that was really important for me to and it's still important for me to focus on like what the gospel is and what Jesus and who Jesus really is, and what, why He is such an important part of the process. And how this looks in a relationship level is that, depending on how long our addictions are for me, it was about 3 years of 2 years I'm in active addiction, and then the last year I was tapering, so I was still in addiction as well. So it was 3 years of being in kratom addiction, and that really put a strain on a lot of my relationships. And when I was taking kratom, I was consumed in it, like I was talking about a moment ago. And I also became like super irritable when my doses would wear off and when I would be like in between doses. So this really came between me and the people that I loved. And as I started to go through this process of turning away from kratom and quitting and getting into my recovery process, there came a time for me to work on my relationships. And like we were talking about with restitution, I went through that process first of, making things right and taking accountability in whatever ways that I could with people. Sometimes it's not best for us to tell certain people in our lives about our kratom addiction. I was talking with one of you recently about this, that they were wondering about, if in when I was going through my situation, if family members could tell that I wasn't doing okay and like what I did about that, and if I told them. And you're gonna know like if it's appropriate or not to tell the people that you're in relationships with about your kratom addiction. It's often very important to tell the closest people that will understand, that are of the maturity level to understand it. I don't think that it's appropriate to tell, really small children. I don't think that it's appropriate to tell, certain people in our lives that may understand nothing about, addiction and then create, like, let alone what even kratom is. And so I had to be careful about the people that I chose to actually, explain everything to. But those in my life that I had relationships with that I wasn't able to tell them, the extent of, my kratom addiction and what even kratom was, I let them know that I was going through a hard time. And I've told you guys before that I lost my dad right before I got into my kratom addiction. And so along with my addiction, I was navigating the grief of losing a parent. So, when I talked to people, I let them know that, I was having a hard time with the grieving process and I was running into different challenges. Because sometimes, people aren't going to understand, especially with kratom being still kind of obscure. Like, it's known by people who know it, but it still is, like, a lot of people don't understand it. I'm not saying lie to people because, that is obviously not, that's not what we're going for here. But there are some people in some situations where it's best to just let them know that you're going through a hard time, you're struggling with different things, so that they understand, a little bit of what's going on. Because just faking that you're fine and telling somebody that you're fine, like, people can read through that. So often admitting like what you're going through without being specific about it being kratom addiction can be really beneficial. I also believe too that sometimes, waiting until you get to a point in your recovery process where you're solid, where there isn't going to be this higher risk of relapsing, and you're not in this very vulnerable, very delicate space of your acute withdrawals and that point, because that time, I do recommend it being a safe time and a safe place. If you let everybody know that you're going through kratom withdrawals, it sometimes doesn't work out well. And so keeping that place, and that time safe for you might be a good idea. Relationships like marriages and partnerships, and even relationships with like older children, like your really core inner circle close relationships, I do think that it's a good idea to let them know, as long as like I said, your children are old enough. And sometimes even like you're gonna have to use your discernment and your discretion when it comes down to that. But like husbands and wives and partners, they need to know what's going on. So I just explain a little bit about like what it looks like to start the reconciliation process. What it looks like moving forward from there is, showing up and being present in these relationships, taking accountability for the things that we've done, like I was saying, like it just said in this book. And this has happened with me that, sometimes people are not receptive to our attempts to reconcile with them. Sometimes it's best that we not reconcile with people on a physical level, meaning like they come back into our lives. And sometimes God intends for certain relationships to, we're supposed to love people from a distance and pray for them from a distance, and we're not supposed to have them come back into our lives. So reconciliation can take on different ways of playing out in our lives with different relationships. But just as with restitution, the point of reconciliation is to bring back and restore what has been lost to our addictions in these relationships. And what happens when this goes on and it's successful is it brings joy and peace to our lives and to our relationships. And it often makes them stronger, because when we go through these struggles and we're able to move forward in these relationships and take accountability for the things that we've done and do what we need to do to make them right, then that really strengthens our relationships and makes them better. So this was a cool one, and this is the hard work of recovery, you guys. And we're going to be getting into the good stuff, like I've been saying. We're going to be moving on to rejoicing tomorrow, which is going to be super sweet. And then we're going to be in when we reach the promised land after we move forward out of the wilderness. So it's going to be awesome, and I look forward to that. So let us know how you're doing in the comment section below, and I'll see you tomorrow when we'll be rejoicing together. Okay, love you guys. Bye.